The World Cup, it's been bringing us so much joy. But as we've shown throughout this series, there's always something more sinister going on. And so to only lean into that joy the World Cup has been giving us means to ignore the mistreatment of the Iranian team, forced to fly back and forth between Mexico and the US, without proper preparation or recovery time between matches. It means to ignore the fact that the US Secretary of Homeland Security said he might have danced a happy dance when Iran were eventually eliminated from the tournament. It means to ignore other visa restrictions by the US government on fans, officials, journalists, and referees. And it means to ignore Donald Trump's meddling in this tournament, pressuring FIFA President Gianni Infantino to review US star Flo Balogun's suspension from the host nation's match with Belgium. I'm Mehdi Hassan, and this is The Dark Side of the World Cup, a three-part series from Zeteo, where we've been showing you how authoritarian leaders have used the tournament to sanitize their image and whitewash their crimes for close to a century. This is episode 3, where we'll look more closely at their biggest partner in crime, FIFA. Believe it or not, FIFA, the multi-billion-dollar entity that serves as football's governing body, is actually classified as a non-profit organization. But if you go back to its quaint beginnings, it makes a little bit more sense. FIFA was formed in 1904 in Paris by 7 European nations to oversee international competition for association football, which at the time was barely 40 years old. And it wasn't until 1930 that a World Cup, the global festival that FIFA is so known for, first took place. But it was nothing like the extravaganza we have going on right now. Only 13 countries took part. The United States, surprisingly, was one of them. My home country, England, somehow wasn't. That's right. The country that codified the game wasn't actually a member of FIFA at the time and didn't even play in a World Cup until 1950. Imagine if we'd played some of those early, smaller tournaments. Maybe we would have won 3 World Cups by now. But I digress. The point is, FIFA wasn't then what we know it as today. It wasn't a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, and everyone wasn't dying to play in a World Cup. So how did it evolve over time?
You can track FIFA over the course of the 20th century, similarly to the way you can track, say, the evolution of global politics.
That's Ishan Tharoor, a longtime global affairs writer for Time and the Washington Post, who now writes for the New Yorker.
It becomes more diverse, it becomes less Eurocentric, it becomes more animated by the concerns of, or at least the interests of players outside of the West. And it reflects the kind of globalizing world in good and bad ways.
Jules Rimet was a figure who believed in the good. You may know the name because the World Cup, the actual trophy, used to be named after him. But the man himself was the FIFA president at the time of the first World Cup tournament. And as his grandson once told The Independent, Rimet was a humanist and an idealist who believed that sport could unite the world. And look, in many ways, it does. We've talked in this series about how the World Cup is a carnival of sorts. It can bring people together. But we've also talked about the darker side. It's the name of this series, after all. And that all starts with a decision Rimet made in 1932.
In 1932, Jules Rimet and FIFA handed the 1934 World Cup to Benito Mussolini and Italy. Rimet's dogged clutching to the idea of neutrality made it seem like that really wasn't that big of a deal because politics was not supposed to enter his beloved World Cup. Little did he know what Mussolini was capable of doing with a tournament like the World Cup.
That's another Jules, Boykov. You may remember him from episode 1. He's the author of the recent book Red Card, the 2026 World Cup, Sports Washing and the FIFA Greed Machine. And as he says, the 1934 World Cup was the first instance of an authoritarian leader using a World Cup tournament to sanitize their crimes and misdeeds. As we've discussed earlier, Mussolini really took advantage of it. But when looking at it in terms of FIFA and Rimet and their roles in that tournament, 1934, it's clear they were complicit in giving Mussolini that platform. And given Rimet's belief that football could be used as a mechanism for unity, that makes him either hypocritical or naive. According to Jules Boykov, it was the latter.
Jules Rimet is known by many historians of football as the most successful, maybe even best president of the organization. Now, that's a low bar, to be absolutely clear. But by all accounts, he was a decent man. He was a very religious man. The problem is that Jules Rimet's brand of theoretical neutrality is actually to the advantage of aggressors like Benito Mussolini. Jules Rimet is a good example of how theoretical commitment to neutrality can in practice mean implicitly siding with the aggressor, implicitly siding with the oppressor, and in this case, implicitly siding with Benito Mussolini, an authoritarian bent on spreading fascism far and wide.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share, and subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zoteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism. As you'll realize by the end of this episode, to be seen as the best FIFA president really is to clear a very low bar. And Rimet's missteps didn't necessarily end with Mussolini. According to the acclaimed football writer Simon Cooper, Rimet and the FIFA delegation went to the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany, despite calls for a boycott from the French media. 2 years later, France hosted the 1938 World Cup, just months after Germany's annexation of Austria. And yet Rimet not only allowed Germany to play, the German team also did Nazi salutes on the pitch before their games. Not long after, Nazi Germany was invading France during World War II. But when it comes to the 1934 World Cup in Italy, Rimet eventually seemed to realize his naivete on some level, saying, "I have the impression that it was not FIFA that really organized the World Cup, but Mussolini." But all of this naivete came with costs, both serious and absurd costs, that were major embarrassments for Rimet. Here's Ishan Taror again.
The fascist government tries to attach itself to the tournament, tries to make Italy's own success in it a kind of outgrowth of the mass popularity of fascist rule. And when Italy eventually does win, the tiny Jules Rimet trophy that is reserved for the winners is not enough. So Mussolini has a gigantic Il Duce trophy made that's many times larger than the actual World Cup trophy, and that's also presented. So to kind of, in the most on-the-nose way, hammers home not just the fact that this tournament has been a wonderful showcase for Italy, but it's been a wonderful showcase for the preeminence and prowess of its fascist regime.
The World Cup becoming a showcase for fascism is something we've seen repeatedly, as we saw with Argentina in 1978. But beyond the way the World Cup helped the Argentinian military junta with its image, the 1978 tournament is also important in the history of FIFA for another key reason. It marked the true commercialization of the game that has also led to such large-scale corruption. Before we get back to 1978, though, it's important to understand the politics of FIFA and how officials within the organization began using their power to exploit those reliant on them to grow football in developing countries.
As the World Cups become bigger business, as FIFA grows larger in terms of its membership, of course, the officials within FIFA become more powerful and influential, wield clout in more pronounced ways. And you see from the middle of the 20th century onwards, the heads of FIFA developing very sophisticated and lucrative networks of patronage through the kind of soccer pyramid, from officials at the center of FIFA to regional officials and the heads of confederations in other countries. And it becomes a bit of a mafia type operation. I use that term carefully. I don't mean to say it's necessarily always corrupt or criminal, but there is a very clear web of patronage that emerges through the governing structures in FIFA and dictate how the organization operates.
And the person who really took this system to another level was João Havelange. A former Olympian from Brazil, Havelange was the first non-European president of FIFA, and he positioned himself as a figure to represent and give developing countries more of a voice in the football world.
Havelange supercharges FIFA's development from being this slightly modest parochial institution of Europe and South America that presides over the World Cups to being a kind of supercharged global entity that's much more commercialized